I saw it stand up before I ever saw what it really was. For a long time, I told myself I hadn't. That's the kind of lie your mind gives you when it wants to keep the world normal for just a few more minutes. We were already deep in the timber by then, half a mile past the rusted chain, past the weather-bleached sign that said the land beyond was closed to the public. The light had started to thin between the trees. I was kneeling over a smear of fresh blood in the leaves when I looked up and caught movement ahead of us. A deer stood between two black oaks, maybe 70 yards out, and for 1 second, less than that really, it looked too tall. Not big, not broad, tall. Its front half seemed lifted, almost the height of a man. Then it dropped back down so smoothly that if I blinked, I would have missed it. When I looked again, it was just a buck in the brush with its head half turned, one antler visible through the branches. "See him?" my brother whispered. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure "him" was the right word anymore. My brother Wade had shot the buck an hour earlier just north of the creek, right at the edge of the restricted tract. It had stepped into a gap between poplars at maybe 90 yards, broadside, clean enough for a decent shot. Wade took it, and we both heard the impact. The buck kicked, lurched, then vanished into the timber. Normally, that would have been the whole thing. Give it time, follow the blood, drag it out before dark. But the blood trail wasn't right. There was enough of it at first. Bright splats on leaves, a spray fan across a stump. Signs that should have meant the animal wouldn't go far. But the trail didn't weaken. It changed. The blood began appearing in neat drops, evenly spaced, as if it were being poured instead of spilled. The tracks got strange too. At first, there were clear deer prints dug into the wet soil near the creek bank. Then the ground hardened. The leaf litter thickened, and we lost them for a while. When we found them again in a patch of black mud, Wade stopped dead. "What the hell is that?" I stepped up beside him and looked down. The first 3 prints were normal enough, split hooves, deep and sharp in the mud. The next one wasn't. It looked like someone had pressed a hand into the earth. Long palm, narrow fingers. Not exactly human. Too long for that, too thin, but still unmistakably a hand. Then another deer print, then another handprint. As if something had been changing its mind about how it wanted to move. Wade stared at them, rifle hanging loose in his hands. "Bear cub, maybe?" "No way." He gave me an irritated look. "You say that awful fast." "Because bears don't leave that." The fingers in the print were splayed too wide. There were marks at the tips that looked like nails or claws dragged lightly over the mud. More than that, the spacing was wrong. Whatever made it had shifted from hoof to hand without breaking stride. Wade muttered something under his breath and stepped around the prints instead of over them. We should have turned back then. I know that now. But that's the trick with bad places. They rarely announce themselves all at once. They let you explain away the first thing, then the second. By the time the truth gets too big to ignore, you're already where it wants you. The closed section of the forest had always carried stories. Every town has land like that. A patch people talk about too casually when they don't really mean it, and too seriously after a couple of beers when the sun's gone down. Mostly old nonsense. A logging road no one used anymore. Some state dispute over the property line. Ruined equipment left back there. There'd always been talk for years about disease in the deer population, though nobody ever seemed able to say exactly what kind. The official sign at the chain barrier just said, "Entry prohibited. Wildlife management area under restriction." That was enough for most people. Not for hunters. Not when the wounded buck crossed into it. Wade and I had grown up in those woods. Not that exact section, but close enough to feel like we knew the shape of the land. We knew how the ridges folded, how the creek bent south and came back east, where the pines started swallowing light earlier than they should. I was 37 then. Wade was 41. Our father had taken us hunting from the time we were old enough to carry thermoses and keep quiet. Wade was the better shot. I was the one who noticed things. That had been true our whole lives, and I think maybe he hated it a little. "You still on that blood?" he asked quietly. I looked down and found another drop on a curled beech leaf. "Yeah," I said. He glanced into the darkening woods. "Then we keep moving." There was impatience in his voice, but underneath it, I heard something else. Not fear exactly. The early shape of fear. The part that doesn't have a name yet. The forest beyond the creek was wrong in subtle ways first. Too quiet for late afternoon. No wind in the upper branches, even though we'd felt it near the truck. No squirrels breaking through leaf litter. No birds calling from deeper in. You don't notice normal forest noise until it's gone. Then the silence starts to feel built, like walls. 100 yards further in, we found the first carcass. It was a fox, or what had been one. It lay on its side in a shallow bed of ferns. Something had opened it with a terrible precision. There was blood on the red fur and on the stems beneath it, but not much. Hardly any meat had been taken. Wade crouched beside it, frowning. "Coyotes?" he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Coyotes don't leave this much." He nudged the fox's shoulder gently with the barrel of the rifle. Flies lifted in a dark little cloud and settled again. Maybe something got spooked. Yeah, maybe. But I'd seen enough dead animals in the woods to know feeding from display. This looked less like a meal than an opening, like someone had unzipped it just to see what was inside. We kept going. That was mistake number 2. The blood trail led us past a stand of white pines so thick the ground beneath them had gone nearly bare. Needles softened under our steps. The air smelled different there. Wet bark, old sap, and something sour underneath it. A smell like meat left too long in cold water. Wade stopped and sniffed. "You smell that?" He scanned the trees and lifted the rifle a little higher. That was when we saw the second deer. At least, that's what I called it in my head for the first few seconds after I looked straight at it. It stood on a low rise maybe 40 yards to our left. Doe-sized, no antlers, gray-brown hide, thin neck. It was facing us directly, which deer don't like to do for long when they know you're there. Usually they jerk, stamp, wheel, and then vanish. This one didn't move at all. Its ears were wrong. They hung too low, almost slack, as if they weren't being held by anything. And its eyes, I remember those eyes better than anything. Not because they glowed. They didn't. I wish they had. That would have been easier somehow. What they did was worse. They held still without focus, like glass marbles placed in wet sockets. No nervous flickering, no animal alertness. Just a blank kind of attention pointed straight at us. Wade raised the rifle. "Don't," I said. "Why?" "Because it wasn't acting right. because something about the rise and fall of its chest looked wrong. Because even from that distance, I had that awful impression its hide sat loosely over whatever shape was underneath, like clothes on a stranger. I couldn't say any of that without sounding insane, so I said, "It's out of season." He almost laughed, but the sound never fully came out. The doe turned its head then, very slowly, and every hair on my arms rose. A deer's head turns at the neck. This one seemed to turn lower than that, too. A ripple passing through the shoulders under the skin, as if whatever was inside needed more of the body to participate. Then it walked behind two cedars and disappeared. No bounding, no white tail flashing, just a measured step into shadow, and nothing. Wade kept the rifle trained on the trees long after it was gone. "I don't like this," he said. That was the first honest thing either of us had said since crossing the creek. "Then let's go." He hesitated, looked ahead, looked back the way we'd come. Then he said, "If that buck's still alive, it's suffering." I nearly told him I didn't care. Instead, like an idiot, I nodded and followed him deeper in. The light got worse fast after that. There's a point in winter woods where afternoon doesn't fade so much as collapse. 1 minute there's still color in the trunks, the next, everything turns the same exhausted blue-gray. The blood on the leaves darkened until I had to kneel to find it. More than once, the only reason I stayed on trail was because Wade's bullet had clipped one side of the buck's path through the brush. Hair clung to bark, brown and white tufts caught in bramble. Normal signs, comforting signs. Then we found the bedding area. It was a small clearing hidden inside a ring of young maples. The ground flattened in several oval depressions where deer had been laying. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then I realized every bed was empty except one. A deer lay there on its side. Its back was to us, legs folded under, neck stretched out. Dead, I thought. Then I saw the flank move. "Jesus," Wade whispered. He stepped forward before I could stop him. The deer didn't react, didn't even flinch. Wade circled toward the head, rifle aimed. I followed more slowly. Every instinct in me wanting distance, not proximity. When I got close enough, I understood. The deer was already dead. What I'd mistaken for breathing was movement inside it. Wade made a sound in his throat and lifted the rifle. Before he could fire, whatever was inside the carcass went still. The whole clearing felt like it held its breath. Then the deer's front leg bent the wrong way. Not with a snap, not violently. Carefully, deliberately. It planted the hoof against the ground and levered the body upward. The other front leg followed. Then the rear legs, each one stiff for half a second before accepting weight. The carcass stood in a jerking sequence, head hanging too low, open body dripping dark onto the leaves. I don't remember deciding to move. I was already backing away when Wade shouted and fired. The shot cracked through the trees like a bomb. The deer body folded sideways and hit the ground. For one blessed second, I thought that was it. That whatever nightmare had gotten hold of us was still vulnerable to simple things like bullets and bone. Then the body opened. Something long and pale unfolded out of it. Too fluid, too wrong, too fast for my mind to hold on to. Wade fired again. The round hit a sapling behind it. The thing moved faster than sight should allow. 1 second it was there. The next, it had crossed a clearing and vanished into a thicket with a sound like wet cloth dragged over branches. and then silence. Instant and complete. The deerskin, the shell of it, lay empty where it had fallen. The head was still attached. The face stared sideways into the leaves, mouth slightly open. The body hadn't been occupied. It had been worn. Wade grabbed my coat sleeve hard enough to hurt. We're leaving. I didn't argue. We retraced our steps fast and badly, no longer caring how much noise we made. Branches slapped our faces. Needles and mud slid under our boots. Twice I nearly went down. I kept expecting to hear pursuit, footsteps, crashing brush, breathing. But that wasn't how it followed. It stayed parallel to us. I know because every few minutes I caught a glimpse between the trunks. The pale length of something moving just beyond clear sight. Always keeping pace. Sometimes low to the ground. Sometimes too high. At one point I looked right and saw what I thought was the wounded buck standing behind a screen of saplings. Its hide hung strangely at the ribs. One foreleg ended not in a hoof, but in a hand wrapped around the trunk. Then it stepped back and was gone. We crossed the pine stand and passed the fox carcass, only it wasn't a fox anymore. Not entirely. Something had returned to it while we were in the clearing. The skin on its face had been disturbed, and for one insane instant, I thought I saw the shape of fingers testing the loosened hide from inside. "Don't look," Wade snapped. I don't know if he saw it too, or if he just heard the sound I made. But we found the creek by luck more than sense. The water was only shin deep over stone, but in the fading light it looked black and bottomless. We splashed across too hard, slipping, grabbing branches. Wade nearly dropped the rifle. I remember the freezing shock of water inside one boot, and the stupid clarity of noticing it, as if some part of my mind still believed practical discomfort mattered. On the far bank I risked one look back. The thing stood among the trees on the opposite side. It was inside the buck now, or inside enough of it to present the shape. One antler was broken where Wade's shot must have struck. The head hung too low, almost brushing the chest. Its body was broadside, ordinary at a glance, except the front legs were too straight, and it was watching us with those dead marble eyes. Then, very slowly, it turned toward me. A deer turning should begin at the head. This movement began in the torso. The hide twisted around something much thinner and much taller than it should have contained. I heard a wet internal shifting. The deer skin tightened, loosened, then settled. We ran. We didn't stop until the chain barrier came into view near the dirt turnout where we'd parked Wade's truck. Even then, neither of us spoke until the doors were shut. The engine was running, and the headlights were sweeping the road ahead. Wade drove too fast over the washboard ruts, hands white on the wheel. After maybe a half mile, he said, "We're not talking about this." I turned and stared at him. "Are you kidding me?" "No. You think I'm just going to... We saw something diseased, some animal, maybe multiple animals." His voice was thin and hard, like he was building the words while he spoke them. Nobody's gonna believe what it looked like in low light. We were amped up. It was dusk. We were on bad ground. "It came out of a deer, Wade." He didn't answer. "You saw that?" Still nothing. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You shot it." He swallowed and kept his eyes on the road. "And if I tell people I saw a thing wearing a deer like a coat, What exactly happens next? I had no answer. Small towns don't absorb stories like that. They reject them. They flatten them into jokes, drunk stories, or examples of why maybe somebody ought to take your guns away. So we said nothing. That night, Wade went home to his wife in Benton Ridge. I drove back to my place on the edge of town with mud drying on my jeans and the smell of the woods still in my nose. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that carcass standing up piece by piece. I heard the careful bend of that leg. Around midnight, I made coffee I didn't want and sat in the kitchen staring out over the backyard. My house sat at the end of a gravel road, one neighboring property to the west, a strip of uncut trees behind the fence line that widened into public woods beyond. Not the restricted tract, different land, different side of town. That mattered to me at midnight. By 2 a.m, it mattered less. At 2:17, I know because I checked the microwave clock twice. I saw movement at the tree line. At first, I thought it was a deer. Of course I did. A pale shape between trunks, half obscured by brush, head low. Then it stepped forward far enough for the porch light to catch one side of it. One antler, broken. I stayed absolutely still in the kitchen chair. The buck stood just beyond the fence, maybe 30 yards from the back door. A faint mist curled from its body in the cold, though the night itself was clear. It didn't graze, didn't paw the ground. It just stood there facing the house, facing me. I told myself it couldn't possibly be the same thing. I told myself plenty of bucks had broken antlers. I told myself distance and darkness were doing what distance and darkness do. Then it lifted one front leg and placed it against the top rail of the fence. Not over it, on it. Balanced there for a moment with impossible steadiness. The leg bent inward in the middle where no deer leg has a joint. I couldn't move, couldn't even stand. It held that pose like it knew I was watching, like it wanted me to understand that we were past accident now, past confusion. Then the shape under the deerskin seemed to lengthen. The back rose, the neck collapsed inward. For one terrible second, the whole animal shape loosened, as if whatever wore it had almost stepped free. I made a sound then. Not a yell, something smaller, weaker. The thing went still again. Then, with a patience that felt horribly human, it lowered the leg from the fence, turned, and walked back into the trees. I didn't call the police. What would I have told them? I called Wade instead. He answered on the 4th ring, my voice thick with sleep and irritation. What? It's here. Silence. Then, what do you mean here? Outside my house. That woke him. I heard the bed creak, quick movement, a door opening somewhere in the background so he wouldn't wake Melissa. What did you see? I told him, all of it. The fence, the leg, the antler. When I finished, there was a long pause. And then he said very quickly, it was at mine too. The cold that went through me then was worse than anything in the woods. How long? 10 minutes maybe? I saw it from the upstairs window. He sounded like each word cost him something. Back by the shed, just standing there. Why didn't you call me? I was trying to decide if I lost my mind. I almost said something angry. Instead, I asked, "What did it do?" Another pause. "It looked at the house," he said. "That's all. Then it went into the trees." I gripped the edge of the table hard enough to ache. "It followed us." "Yeah." Neither of us said the next part out loud. It hadn't followed the blood. It had followed us. Morning should have made things better. It didn't. In daylight, the yard looked ordinary again. Frost on the grass, gray fence, bird feeder moving slightly in a breeze that had returned to the world as if nothing was wrong. Wade came over around 9 without telling Melissa where he was going. We checked the back fence first. There were no hoof prints in the frost, only disturbances in the dead grass where something had stood too still for too long. And one impression on the top rail. Not a hoof mark, a handprint. Long palm, thin fingers. Too narrow to be human. Too deliberate to be animal. The wood was damp where it had pressed there, as if the thing had left moisture behind. Wade stared at it, then looked away. "Burn the woods," he said. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. We spent the whole morning pretending there was some action available to us that didn't sound insane. March back into the restricted zone with more men and more rifles? As if numbers made any difference to something that could step in and out of a body like clothing. By noon, Wade had convinced himself again that maybe there was an explanation. Disease, parasite, some malformed predator using carcasses. Something that only seemed impossible because we caught it in fragments. I let him talk. People need their scaffolding. Mine gave out around 3 that afternoon when I drove into town for gas and saw a pickup parked outside the diner with a deer carcass strapped in the bed. A legal buck, tagged and cleaned poorly, head lolling over the tailgate. And I had to stop myself from walking over and cutting it open right there in public. That was the damage done. Once you've seen something hollow wearing life, every shape starts to feel like a container. Over the next week, more stories drifted around town in the sideways way stories do when nobody wants responsibility for them. A labradoodle gone missing behind the elementary school. A woman on County Road 9 swearing there was a deer in her garden that stood there for 15 minutes staring into the kitchen while her husband slept through it. 2 road-killed raccoons found under the bridge with their bellies opened and almost nothing eaten. Wade stopped hunting. So did I. He started keeping the blinds shut at night. I started checking the tree line every time I walked from the truck to my front porch. Keys held between my fingers like that would matter. Then, 10 days after the hunt, Wade called me just after sunset and said, "Come over." No greeting, no explanation. When I got there, he was waiting in the driveway with a flashlight and the rifle. "It's in the back field," he said. Melissa had taken the kids to her sister's, thank God. The house lights were all on. Wade looked older than he had a week earlier. We walked past the shed and through the gate into the field behind his property. The one that sloped into a line of cedars along the creek. The grass reached our calves, silver under the moon. Cold enough to sting the lungs. At first, I didn't see anything. Then Wade touched my sleeve and aimed the flashlight. The beam found the deer immediately. It stood at the far edge of the field, just before the trees. Buck-shaped, one antler broken. Its hide looked dry from a distance, almost normal. Then the beam climbed higher, and I saw the chest. There was a split in the sternum now, a dark seam pulled slightly apart, as if whatever lived inside had grown tired of maintaining the disguise. Something pale showed between the edges. Not bone, softer than bone, wet. The deer took one step forward, then another. The front legs moved like stilts controlled by something learning as it came. Wade whispered, "Shoot with me." I didn't have a gun. He must have forgotten that. The deer kept advancing, slow and steady, not charging, not startled. Coming toward us the way a person might if they knew panic belonged to the other side. Wade fired. The round struck the shoulder, and the whole animal jolted sideways. But it didn't go down. Instead, it stopped. Its head lifted. The jaw parted too far, not like a deer bleeding, like a seam opening. Something inside pressed outward against the face from underneath the skin. I grabbed Wade by the coat and dragged him backward. He fired again, wild this time. The shot vanished into the field. Then the thing moved. Not at us, around us. It dropped low, so low it seemed boneless, then crossed 20 yards in a blur to our left. For one terrible instant, the flashlight caught it between shapes. Deer hide stretched over a narrow white frame, one hind leg empty for half its length. The skin collapsing and filling again as it ran. Then it disappeared into the cedar line. The field went silent. Wade was breathing in ragged little pulls. A month later, the state closed a larger section of the forest. No public statement beyond a notice about environmental assessment and unsafe conditions. Men in dark trucks came and went for a while. Somebody said they were surveying runoff contamination. Somebody else said chronic wasting disease had jumped species. Old men at the diner pretended not to care, and then lowered their voices when they talked about which roads they no longer took after dark. I moved that spring. Not far, just farther from trees. Wade put floodlights behind his house and motion cameras on the shed, though he refuses to show me the footage from the 3 nights they all triggered at once, and then cut to static. We don't hunt anymore. People notice, but not enough to push. Sometimes if you tell enough of the truth with your face, nobody asks for details. I'm telling you this now because last week, I saw one on the shoulder of Route 16 at dusk. Not roadkill, not crossing. Waiting. A deer standing just beyond the white line, body angled toward traffic, perfectly still while cars rushed past and rocked it with wind. No flinch, no fear. As I drove by, it turned its head and looked directly into my window. One antler broken, its eyes empty and fixed. And just before it vanished behind me, I saw one front hoof lift from the gravel and press, very delicately, against the trunk of a pine, in the shape of a hand. So if you're ever out in the woods and you see a deer that doesn't run, don't get closer because you think it's sick. Don't step toward it because you feel sorry for it. And if you notice the tracks changing behind it, hoof prints becoming something with fingers, leave the animal where it stands and go. Because if you let yourself see too much, it may decide you're worth following home. And once it knows where you live, the worst part isn't wondering what it is. It's knowing that somewhere out past the porch light, hidden just inside the trees, it's still wearing the shape badly enough to let you know it doesn't need to fool you anymore. And that's where tonight's nightmare ends. But if you heard something move while you were listening, don't look too quickly. Like the video, subscribe to Midnight Delight, and remember, never listen alone. Good night.